Before we get into this video, I had a couple of my friends join me for this collaboration, and definitely go check them out after the video. Trust me, you're gonna want to listen to this entire thing. Let's begin. I was just talking about this the other day. Scary because of human nature. My neighbor at my old apartment was a state park ranger for years, but he's now retired. Apparently when he first got the job, there was a younger kid who went missing while out camping or a hiking trip. They organized this huge search for the area, to no avail. No clues or anything. The kid is just missing. A few years go by, and some new evidence turns up. It wasn't in the direction that they originally searched. It was just part of his camping equipment. On his off time, my neighbor took to searching the area where it was found, hoping that there would be more clues. Just outside of the state park lived a couple in a ramshack hovel who were quite reclusive and odd. One day my neighbor had to talk to them about something unrelated to this missing kid. He is in their house, which is a mess of junk. No running water, etc. Hard to focus on anything there. While he is talking to this couple, he realized that this guy has a weird-looking ashtray. He looks closer and realizes that it's a human skull, and it looks small. Later on, there's an investigation that goes on to the couple. And here's where the things get really weird. So the investigation goes on and shows that they were actually innocent of killing this kid. He probably died to exposure or dehydration. Apparently the guy came across the body afterwards, and his dogs were after it. When he took the skull, it was really recent after the death, and apparently it still had the head features like the hair, eyes, everything. This guy took the head, defleshed the damn thing, took the top off to use it as an ashtray. Apparently he was well aware that there was a current search party for the missing child back then, and could recognize the kid from the photos. But it never dawned on him or his wife to go to the cops, or to inform anybody. They just found him, and then they took his head. He just saw an opportunity to make an ashtray, and that's what he said. Apparently he showed them where the remains were, and they were able to scrounge up together enough to make a burial. What's even worse is they decided that they would keep it quiet so that the family didn't know that some guy in the middle of the woods put out his Marlboros in their kid's head for 5 years after letting his dogs eat the remains. I have a pretty good track record for finding missing people. Most of the time they just wander off the path, or slip down a small cliff, and they can't find their own way back. The majority of these people have always heard the "stay where you are" thing, and they don't usually wander far. But I've had 2 cases where that actually didn't happen. Both of them bother me a lot, and I use them as motivation to search even harder for these missing people in these cases. The first was a little boy who was out berry picking with his parents. He and his sister were both together, and both of them went missing around the same time. Their parents lost sight of them for a few seconds, and in that time, both kids apparently wandered off. When their parents couldn't find them, they called us, and we came out to search the area. We found the daughter pretty quickly, and when we asked her where her brother was, she told us that he had been taken away by the bear man. She said that this bear man had given her berries and told her to stay quiet, that he wanted to go play with her brother for a while. The last she saw of her brother, he was riding on the shoulders of the bear man and seemed calm. But of course, our first thought was abduction, but we never found a trace of another human being in that area. The little girl was also so insistent about him not being a normal man, but that he was tall and covered in hair, like a bear, and that he had a weird face. We searched the area for weeks, It was one of the longest calls I've ever been on. But we never found a single trace of that kid. The other was a young woman who was hiking with her mom and grandpa. According to her mother, her daughter had climbed up a tree to get a better view of the forest, and then she just never came back down. They waited at the base of the tree for hours, calling her name, before they called for help. Again, we searched the area, and we never found a trace of her. I have no idea where she could have possibly gone. But neither her nor the grandpa saw her come down. And there's still nothing to come from this.
In the summer of 2012, I took a job as an expedition canoe guide on the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota, Quetico, southern Ontario. These are massive wilderness areas of lakes and lands. I was working for the Boy Scouts and we were based in Moose Lake on the US side. My job was to facilitate a fun and safe multi-day trip, anywhere from 7 to 12 days out. Most of that summer was typical, but the one expedition in particular that still haunts me as a result of what happened to us over the course of a few days. Here's the account in full. My crew was on the younger side. There were 9 of us total, the maximum allowed in a group per our permit. There were 6 scouts and 2 adult supervisors, and myself. They had wanted to do a 200-miler but didn't have the physical ability, so we had to amend our route. They were bummed out, so I decided to take them to a waterfall called Eddy Falls. It's pretty flat up there, so there's a waterfall that is somewhat rare, but that decision would end up putting us in the path of something. We visited the falls and camped near it. That evening, I had the boys working on a camp setup while the advisors worked on fire for dinner. I was collecting firewood in a big tangle of downed trees, brush, and bramble. I could faintly hear the falls off to my left when out of nowhere, I hear the most unearthly scream or roar that I've ever heard. It stopped me dead in my tracks and I was completely frozen. The second scream was closer, and the third even closer than that. I couldn't see anything due to the thickness of the brush, but whatever this was coming directly at me. By the fourth scream, I could feel it in my chest. I got nauseous and involuntarily barked at it. I've never before or since heard that sound come out of my body. The fifth scream almost physically hurt, but it snapped me back to reality and I ran back to our camp. My crew had heard it too, but what am I to tell them? I claimed it was a boar, but there's no boar up there, and the advisors knew I was lying, but didn't call my bluff. After dinner, they went to their tents and I retired to my hammock that was about 50 yards from camp. As a rule, I always set my hammock up at my head height, so it's about 6 feet up. I would use a tarp over my body and head to keep the morning dew off and the morning mosquitoes at bay. But the tarp wasn't strung up. That's important. It was just loosely over me. It must have been around 3 to 4 a.m. when I was awakened by what sounded to me like a woman sobbing. Not an outright cry, but a sob. At the same time, I'm hearing something walking through the thick brush down past my feet. So I listen, totally still and quiet as it crosses into camp. I could hear the change from brush to granite rock, but could still hear its heavy footfalls as it walked right through the camp and on towards me. At this point, the tarp is still over my head, so I can't see a thing, and I don't know what to do. In no time, it was standing right next to me. I could hear the breathing, loud and congested sounding. I could smell the musk. I could feel its enormous presence only inches from my body, just standing there. Time to make a decision. I suddenly threw the tarp off my head, and as I did this, my left hand touched this thing in the chest. It was dark, but I could make out briefly a very large upright figure. The hair on it was long and coarse. The frame itself was impressive, like bodybuilder status, pectoral, is what I ended up touching. It all happened in a second, and as soon as my hand made contact, it bolted back into the brush with immense speed for such thick debris. By the time I got my headlamp on, it was gone. My crew had slept through all of it, so I read until the sun came up and decided not to mention it to anyone. The next day, we moved on to a few miles towards a base camp and camped on a small island. Campsites on the US side are designed by a fire pit and a grumper, which is a fiberglass toilet over a deep hole. When we were arriving, it was evening. One of the adult supervisors needed to visit the grumper, so we walked towards it. About 2 minutes later, we heard him yelling and he came running back to the camp, still pulling up his pants, and said he'd just seen a gorilla run right in front of him. I asked if it was maybe a bear, and he said absolutely not. That he'd hunted bear for years and that was no bear. It was a monkey, and it was about 9 feet tall. At this height estimate, I'm imagining being back in my hammock. If I touched the chest and it was about 6 feet off the ground, that puts the head close to 9 feet up. Was it stalking us? Was there more than one? All the boys are now scared. It's time to mitigate. I suggest a night paddle. No one's sleeping anymore anyway, so we pack up and set out around 8 p.m. and paddled by headlamp for several miles. My plan was to get back onto Moose Lake and camp very near to base so we could be the first crew off the water the following day. Moose Lake is connected to the Newfoundland Lake, and by a small pinch, and a channel of water that's not very deep or wide. There's dark woods on both sides. We were right in the middle of the pinch when a rock the size of a baseball came flying out of the woods on the right side and narrowly missing the bow of the canoe I was steering. There's no cliff there. This thing was forcefully thrown at us from the tree line. At this, we paddled like hell. We paddled to the center of Moose Lake, tied all 3 canoes together, and we sat out there all night. With the sunrise, we paddled back to base camp and ended our expedition. No one wanted to talk about what had happened, and I was okay with that. They left for Oklahoma the next day. After they left, I went to work a shift in the canoe yard, helping crews offload. My buddy Justin just got back from a trip in the same area we'd been in. He was in Bear Loop. As I was helping him put the boat on the rack, I noticed that he had a distant look, almost a 1,000-yard stare. I asked him how his trip went. He said it was all good until they hit Knife Lake, Newfound Lake. He said that they were being messed with for a few nights on Knife, and then had a rock thrown at them in the Newfound Pinch. Sure enough, for a solid 2 weeks after that, crews kept coming back from that area with very similar stories. One night, there was a crowd of us guides in the staff lodge swapping trail stories, and these encounters came up one after another. Screams, rocks, sightings of apes. Then from the back corner of the room I hear a chuckle. It's one of the old veteran guides who'd been there for over a decade. All he said was, "It's about time somebody else seen one." I asked how long he'd known that they were there for. He said he's been encountering them for around 10 years now. Then he said, "They talked to me." This shocked me. "Like a language?" I asked. "No, they communicate telepathically. The less you acknowledge them, the less they'll bother you. But they can read you, and they like it when you're afraid. It's a game to them." What happened out there is still a big question in my mind. I've always been open to the idea of Sasquatch. Their existence was never a huge stretch for me. But what really sticks with me is the way that veteran guide spoke of their intelligence and the parapsychological abilities. That they can read human emotions as clear as pages in a book. That they know our species better than we know ourselves.
My normal shifts were during the day, 9 to 5 like most people. But on that day, we were short-handed on the night shift staff because the last person who worked during those hours had just quit. We had lately had a whole lot of people quitting the night shift, so that meant I had to cover. Weirdly enough, I had never had to work the graveyard shift before then, and I was actually excited for it. I had brought some coffee and 5-hour energy with me because the hours ran 10 till 5, and there was no way I'd make it that far naturally. I got to my tower right before 10, when it was already pitch black, and the cold July night had fully set in. The tower was fairly tall, with several flights of stairs leading up to the top. The whole thing was mostly surrounded by thick forest except for the trail I came from, and a murky pond that was just to the right of the one of the tower's legs. The pond itself was covered in those little frog pads and had algae floating around over the surface. It was actually quite big for a natural lagoon. I climbed up and all I could hear was a non-stop sound of crickets, frogs and an occasional owl. When I hit the top, I fumbled with my keys until I found the right one and walked right on in. The one room was small and square-shaped. 3 of the walls were mostly glass and the other one was opaque and had the door I just came in. The roof went up like a pyramid for a short length until it peaked, and it was all made of wood. To my left was a nicely made bed and a nightstand with a lamp and flashlight on top, not like I'd be using the bed though. On the wall next to that was the CB radio and a communication stand, which every one of those towers had. Next to that sat my refrigerator and microwave, which was part of a small kitchen that extended to the other wall as well. Inside the kitchen on the right wall were several cabinets, some small ones that held snacks and some canned foods, and another set of giant cabinets that I couldn't open, which likely had vacuums and other cleaning supplies that were above my pay grade. Roomy. I went over to the communications stand and did my standard check to make sure everything was properly working. I called into the ranger station channel and said, "Well Donnie, it looks like it's just you and me tonight." Donnie didn't say anything back, so I figured he was just taking a shit. I went and grabbed the flashlight on the stand and reached into one of its drawers, pulling out a set of binoculars from it. I went back out onto the balcony and checked to make sure no fire hazards or any other kind of dangerous things were over there. Once I checked that box off my to-do list, I headed back inside and pulled out the chair from the communication stand and put it by one of the glass walls and grabbed a granola bar from one of the kitchen cabinets to munch on. I put the binoculars up to my eyes and looked over the surrounding forest. It didn't seem like any animals were up and about, and no birds were in the sky either. I skimmed over a couple of clearings to make sure that no teenagers were off camping illegally. Then I went and peeked over at a far ridge where I saw a snowman standing alone in a gap of the trees. Hold the fuck up, it was July. I peeked again to see it wasn't a snowman, but some kid in a shitty ghost costume. It looked like the ones from Charlie Brown with the big black holes for eyes that looked more like they were coloured black than actual holes. The kid was still and staring right into my direction, unmoving. I couldn't see the kid's parents anywhere, and by now it was rolling up on 11, so that meant something was up. I broke contact on the kid and walked to the radio, called into the station. "Donnie, you off the shitter yet?" "Barely made it out, but I'm here." I chuckled. Donnie was always good for a laugh. "There's some kid with a blanket walking around the southeast sector and they look alone." "A blanket? The hell are you talking about?" "It's a ghost costume, it's got like black holes for eyes and stuff." "You mean like the Charlie Brown costume? Can you check it out?" "Yeah, I'll go and see what's up. I'll call in the walkie-talkie to tell you what I see." "Roger that." I turned off the radio and crossed over to the nightstand drawer to grab the walkie-talkie. Once I had it, I sat back down in the chair and put the binoculars to my eyes, zooming into where the kid was. The ridge was empty with no kid in sight, which I knew would make this 1,000 times harder. I pulled up the antenna on the walkie-talkie and dialed to the right channel. "Donnie, you hear me?" "Yep, loud and clear. I'm getting close to the sector. I'm heading up to the ridge for a vantage point." "Perfect, that's where I saw the kid, but they've moved on since then." "Well, I'll just check around to see if I can find anything." I watched as Donnie came over the ridge, waving his flashlight around in the dark until he looked towards the tower and shrugged. "Nothing over here." "Damn, hopefully he turns up again. Until then, I'll just notify the police and check with any missing reports." "Alright, I'll go back to..." Donnie's voice cut out and I saw his flashlight turn off in the distance. The small lit up spot where he stood was swallowed in darkness. "Donnie? You there? Donnie?" I heard no response and I rushed outside the door and around the corner to where I saw him yelling his name, only to hear my voice echo into the woods, and that's when it hit me. There wasn't a single other sound in the entire forest. The crickets and the frogs had stopped chirping, The wind didn't rustle through the leaves. Everything was completely standstill. I could hear my heartbeat throbbing in my ears and nothing else. I moved my flashlight around the woods for some futile attempt to find him. I got into the state of mind where I got so scared my throat closed up, and if I moved I felt like something very bad was going to happen. I had to do something now. I turned around, and as I did, I glanced at the stairs below me. At the bottom stood a skinny, horrifically angled woman. She was tall, dripping with water, with black hair and dark, murky blue skin that stretched across her bent and broken bones. Her grey dress was shredded, and her black shoes were muddy and wet, and her face, her eyes were milky white, and her mouth hung wide open like a snake. Like her jaw had been grossly broken. She let out a blood-curdling and ear-piercing scream of agony and began to shuffle up the stairs so fucking fast that I snapped out of my fear lock and I ran the fuck back inside, slamming and locking the door behind me. There was no way she could run that fast, even if all her bones weren't broken into wrong directions. I ran back to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find, and then I pulled out the walkie-talkie, screaming into it. "Is anyone there? Donnie, where the fuck are you? Someone answer me." Then I heard the creaking of a door. I slowly turned and I froze when I saw what was there. The door was still there, locked and shut, and had been completely undisturbed. What scared me was the once locked giant cabinet that now stood open, with a kid dressed like a Charlie Brown ghost standing just in front of it. I stood there, unmoving, until I heard the little shit giggle. I recognised that giggle. There's no fucking way. I pulled off the sheet to see one of Donnie's kids, Marvin, sporting a smirk and a walkie-talkie. "Dad? Joey, I got him." Pissed his pants just like I said he would, right? He and his other son laughed from the other end of the walkie. I was mad, but glad that I wasn't about to get murdered in a goddamn wooden tower. I grabbed his walkie and shot back. "Pissed me off is what you did, you fucking asshole. I hope you're happy." Hearing you scream like a little girl sure did make me happy, alright. Yeah, screw you too. That wasn't even me. That was your stupid zombie chick. Who is that, your wife? My what? Does the ghost look like a zombie from that far away? You said yourself it looked like No, the ghost, dumbass. The woman on the stairs. She screamed and ran up them so that she could scare me into the tower. Hell, she must be like an Olympic runner. Did you get Usain Bolt? Dean, I didn't put no woman on the stairs.
I told this story on Let's Not Meet, but I'm happy to tell it again. In 2016, my boyfriend, now my husband, and I went camping in eastern Pennsylvania. The place we decided to stop for the night was primitive. Camping was free, no cell service, barely a road, etc. We did encounter 2 other people. They might not factor into what happened later at all, but they were creepy, so I'll describe them. The first was a woman who had her truck off to the side of the road a little as we drove past. She had the hood open and seemed to be waiting for someone to stop and offer to help. Usually, my boyfriend had no problem helping someone, but he said this time something about her put him off. She didn't really seem like she needed help, and usually, people who need help look at you hopefully as you approach. She looked like she expected we would stop. That's what my boyfriend said anyway. I hadn't really noticed anything that strange about her. The next person came when we had chosen a spot and were setting up a fire for hot dogs. I had noticed people drive by a few times, but my boyfriend pointed out each time was the same car, and the man in the car watched us each time he passed. My boyfriend was a little uneasy about this, but we had driven around for a while before finding a place we liked. It had been raining, and everything was muddy, and we wanted the driest site possible. He could have been doing the same thing. We briefly thought about moving, but the road was muddy too. If he wanted to find us, all he had to do was follow the tracks. There were some other tracks, but not many. He'd only have to backtrack a little to locate us again. He didn't come by another time, so we stayed and spent the several remaining hours before dark goofing off. No one else drove by. Whether or not those 2 had anything else to do with our experience, the real fear came later. We had gone to sleep in our tent, and sometime around 3 a.m., we were awoken by this very loud noise. I can't describe it very well, or even remember exactly what it sounded like, but my boyfriend said it reminded him of a chain gun revving up. It was also similar to how it would sound if someone recorded a shovel being dragged over gravel and played it over a loudspeaker, is another way he described it. He jumped up and looked out the little window, but couldn't really see anything. The sound repeated itself another few times. I was too scared to speak, so my boyfriend whispered that it was probably miles off and I should go back to sleep. I didn't question this, as I figured loud sounds could be easily heard miles off. After we left, he told me it sounded like it had actually been coming from just down the road, but he didn't want to freak me out. Looking back, I probably should have wondered why he would bother to whisper if apparently the sound was far off. I was still terrified. Every little thing I heard outside sounded like someone was walking around the tent. We lay there for a while longer, then finally, my boyfriend told me to get dressed because we were leaving. I got alarmed by this, and even more alarmed when he unwrapped the machete we had bought just for this trip from its plastic, just before opening the tent. We quickly packed up and loaded the car. I looked around for footprints that weren't our own, but despite the moon providing plenty of light, I couldn't really see. I did point out something my boyfriend hadn't noticed, though, before we got into the car. There was a beer can by our dead fire that hadn't been there before. We didn't even bring beer. While we were driving away, my boyfriend explained that he was nervous someone might have been trying to lure us out, so he didn't think it was a good idea to run from the tent right away. But that wouldn't have stopped us because we had a hybrid car. We joked that that would make a funny hybrid commercial. Number of brutal murders avoided by driving a hybrid? 2. We only joked because we were about shitting ourselves from fear and adrenaline even then. The rest of our trip, we only stayed in well-populated campsites or got a hotel.
Now before you exit this video, I need you to do me a huge solid. All of my friends that helped me in this collaboration, show them some love, please. All 3 of them are fantastic and they did exactly what I wanted them to do. And without them, I couldn't have made this. So I'd like to give a big shout out to Booze and Booze, Noetic Stories, and Mr. Ramsay. Without them, I couldn't have done this video. And you guys should definitely go check out their content. Because not gonna lie, I kind of binge their stuff all the time. Like, legitimately. Make sure to check out their links in the description. All of their links, including mine, are all in there. Make sure to go show them some love. Tell them I sent you. Because, you know, you love me. Okay, I'm delusional right now. But with that being said, if you want more of these, like the collaborations or these types of stories, make sure to comment down in the comment section. Like, comment, subscribe. But anyways, stay safe, stay scary, and I'll see you in the next one. God, this video was fucking awesome.